We pretty much take for granted that speech is how we connect, how we understand what's going on in someone else's mind. But what if there's another way? Today, we're diving into a story that really challenges our most basic ideas about communication itself. A story that sits right at the intersection of neuroscience, human rights, and, well, the unexplained. So let's just start with this question right out of the gate. What if some non-speaking people, especially those on the autism spectrum, aren't silent at all? What if they're actually communicating on a wavelength that our science and maybe even our own beliefs just can't pick up yet? It's a huge idea, and it really forces us to question some of our deepest assumptions about what consciousness even is. At the very heart of this is a claim that is, frankly, extraordinary. It's an idea that's been getting more and more attention thanks to projects like filmmaker Kai Dickens' The Telepathy Tapes. And it's something that, for a lot of people, really pushes the boundaries of what they think is possible. Okay, so here's the core claim, that some non-speaking autistic individuals might be using a form of intuitive thought transfer, telepathy, to communicate. Now, this isn't just some casual idea. It's a direct challenge to what's often called materialist science, which is basically the view that your mind is only what your physical brain does. It's a call to completely reevaluate how we see intelligence and the hidden capabilities of people who, for way too long, have been completely underestimated. To even begin to understand this, you kind of have to move past the abstract theories and just listen to the stories. The evidence that's being presented is often incredibly personal, coming from families, from teachers, and from the individuals themselves. We're not talking about lab reports here. These are accounts of human connection that justify any easy explanation. So the people who believe this is happening, they point to a few key areas of evidence. We're talking about things like kids seeming to know stuff they were never taught, to these deep friendships being formed without a spoken word, and even some really wild claims about physical healing. Let's dig into a couple of these. Just try to wrap your head around this for a second. Imagine a child who's never had a single lesson in, say, Spanish, suddenly understanding it or spelling out Spanish words. The eyewitnesses here, we're talking parents and teachers who have no obvious reason to make this up. They report exactly that. They describe these moments where a child shows they know something that, by any conventional logic, they just shouldn't. And that's why these stories are so powerful for believers. Look, it's one thing to communicate about something you can both see in the room. It's something else entirely to share information that no one else could possibly know. A private family memory, a specific medical detail, a fact hidden from everyone. If this could be verified, it would point to a channel of information that's completely outside of our known senses. And then the claims go even further, beyond just communication, and into the realm of physical healing. This particular story, which has been shared in interviews, suggests a deep connection between this kind of focused, intuitive state of mind and actual profound effects on the body. It's a pretty extreme example for sure, but it speaks to this belief that these abilities, if they're real, might represent some kind of untapped human potential. But of course, claims this big demand extraordinary proof. And that's exactly where the scientific community pumps the brakes and raises some very serious questions. To be real, you can't talk about this subject without getting into the decades of controversy that surround it, especially around a method called facilitated communication. At the very core of this whole debate is this one technique, FC. The idea is simple. You provide some physical support to help a person with motor control issues type on a keyboard or point to letters. But the problem, and the reason for all the controversy, is one big question. Who is actually doing the communicating? Is it the non-speaking person, or is the facilitator consciously or even unconsciously guiding their hand? So this table really breaks down the argument. On one side, you have the proponents. They point to cases with less and less physical support, to spellers who eventually learn to type on their own. They even bring up EEG scans that show brain activity consistent with communication. But on the other side, scientists push back on every single point. They say there's a serious lack of rigorous, double-blind studies. They point out that EEG data is notorious noisy. It can pick up all kinds of brain signals that have nothing to do with telepathy. And they argue that even the tiniest bit of physical support can still influence what gets typed. So when you boil it all down, the broad scientific consensus from all the major psychological and speech organizations is pretty firm. They point to decades of controlled studies where the facilitator didn't know the right answer, and time after time, the messages that were typed reflected the facilitator's knowledge, not the non-speaking person's. And that long history really casts a huge shadow over all these new claims. But what if, and this is what the proponents ask, what if the skepticism itself is part of a pattern we've seen before? What if this isn't the first time a totally new form of communication has been shot down before it even got a fair hearing? To get that perspective, we have to zoom out and look at the history. You know, this debate didn't just pop up yesterday. There's a long, fascinating history of interest in telepathy. You've got famous writers like Mark Twain documenting experiments over a century ago. Then you have this period during the Cold War where it all gets suppressed because it was tied up with military psi research like the Stargate project. And more recently, you've seen the rise of these grassroots movements pushing for alternative ways to communicate, which brings us right back to today. And this is really the core of the counterargument to all the skepticism. Just think about it for a second. Sign language was widely written off as fake communication for years. Braille was literally mocked when it was first introduced. The argument is that society has a pretty bad track record of rejecting things it doesn't immediately understand, especially when it comes to new forms of communication that challenge how we've always done things. So, where does that leave us in all of this? Whether you're a total believer or a complete skeptic, this whole controversy forces us to ask some really big, profound questions about ourselves, about our society, and about the true nature of the human mind. So no matter what you believe about the whole telepathy angle, here's what I think we can take away. First, history shows we tend to deny what's new. Second, and this is huge, this whole conversation proves that non-speaking individuals are almost certainly more capable and more aware than society has ever given them credit for. And that really changes the frame. Suddenly, access to communication isn't just about therapy, it's a fundamental human right. In the end, the evidence is still mostly stories, and the science is nowhere near settled. But the question these stories pose is a powerful one. It asks us to think about the cost of being wrong. Is all our skepticism just protecting scientific integrity? Or is it possible, just possible, that we're silencing an entire community of voices and repeating a mistake we've made so many times before? That's a question worth sitting with for a while. Let us know what you think.